We have an
Good.
evening cast on our
An
hands.
evening cast, yeah. It's all good. I just got a list of like 150 songs I have to learn. So.
And how long?
Undisclosed. It's a new band that I'm on the roster for. It's based out of Dallas. It's like a party band. So they do corporate events and stuff.
That's cool.
But you have to know the whole list before you can take a gig with them. So.
Oh, okay. So basically, whenever you can learn it, then you can gig with them.
Yeah, exactly.
Gotcha. Well, that's cool, though. I mean, are you excited about it?
Yeah, it's cool. The gigs pay well, and they pay for travel. Like, if it's an out-of-town gig, they pay for flights and hotels and everything.
Wow.
So I was happy that I got on the list. I had to send them like audition material and stuff. But then they sent me the list of songs. It's like, whew, there's a hefty list.
Yeah. Man. Well,
and
that's cool,
I know one of the guys who plays in it, and he also said to watch out because they'll just have the keys be different on different nights, and they don't really tell you. And you always play with in-ears, so the track's going in your ear. And so, like, if it's a different key and you play that first note, it's like, oh, ouch. Oh, what's happening?
Yeah. Dang. That's kind of high pressure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't miss that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I remember just being so, like, because I mean, you played in, I mean, how many musicals? Hundreds at this point,
yeah,
right?
a lot.
Yeah, I only did a few, but just the pace of that too, of having to learn and just the cues and you got to play it now.
Yes,
just like yeah.
Man, I haven't done a musical since moving to Texas, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you miss them?
No, I mean I would do one if one came around. I wouldn't. Yeah. I'm not against it, but I don't care that much. Well, I was pretty sick of it.
Well, and the gig that you just told me about sort of was reminiscent of the musical. In a way,
basically. But it's all like pop songs and rock songs.
Right. But you don't have to dance or anything, right?
No, but you have to wear a tux.
Oh, okay.
That's and they have some serious rules, like if you're caught drinking one sip of alcohol on the job, you're fired immediately.
Wow.
If you're caught smoking, if you talk to any event coordinator as a band musician, you're fired immediately.
Wow. It's like working for, wasn't Little Richard kind of, and honestly James Brown too, I think.
Oh, did they do stuff like that with their
I don't want to
band?
be slandering anybody. I don't know. Allegedly. Yeah. People are saying.
People are saying. Yeah, people say it all the time.
Yeah. No. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting. We could go into a whole tangent about that kind of stuff, like how, that kind of strict stuff is really brutal to live under, but it does sort of foster excellence to a degree. It's finding that balance between.
I read a really interesting thread. I don't know if I told you about it or not. I saw it on Twitter the other day, and I'm not sure I agree with it, but it's an interesting idea that was trying to break down the difference between left-wing ideology and right-wing ideology. And it said it all came down to the idea of quality, and that right-wing ideology, as a conservative ideology, likes quality, i.e. the old knightly, courtly idea of a quality individual. Like a knight was a person of quality. And left-wing ideology is anti-quality, or for equality. So the things are not better than other things.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I could see that. Just depends on, it's all perspective. I mean, this is actually a good transition into Foucault because, I could see that. Or thinking about it as the deconstruction of quality.
Mm-hmm. Right, there we go. That's a good way.
Yeah.
I don't know if I agree with it. I just thought it was an interesting argument.
Yeah. I don't know. Well, I mean, maybe we should transition into Foucault because I'm eager. This was I like this, and I mean, we're wrapping him up today too, right?
Right.
Yeah. But we might come back to him, right?
Poor Foucault.
No. He's certainly an interesting bloke, as one might say.
It's a good word.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, so you said before we turned on the buttons that you I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Well, I had a hard time reading this one. Part of it is I'm reading it when I'm kind of tired. So I'm like nodding off every other paragraph, which doesn't make it easy. But I found myself rereading a lot of paragraphs, like having a hard time understanding sort of literally what he's saying in some of them.
I found that I had to reread a lot too, but I've found that with all of them.
There were certain segments where I'm like, oh, this is going great. I like this. And like where he's talking about the air in places of confinement. It's an interesting idea because we still talk about that. And I wonder how he would view our current idea of sort of airborne pathogen, and if it all just ties into this same narrative that he's describing, or if he would give any credence to what we would consider sort of scientific finding or anything like that.
Yeah, that's a good question, because I mean, by the time he was writing, he had felt like, I mean, we'd moved past that specific type. I mean, because so we're talking about the Great Fear today, right? From Madness and Civilization, our last endeavor into Foucault for now, so he talks about air. Because basically it opens up talking about contamination and this new idea of how madness is almost looked at as a contaminant or an airborne infection that you can actually catch in the 18th century. This began to become a thing. And then there was this idea that epidemics actually started from asylums, and so this general stigma, of course, that existed, probably going back to the leprosy antecedents, propagated. To your point, I don't know, because so then, I mean, a lot of what he talks about in, I would say, the chapters after this, in The Birth of Asylum, is he talks about these two 18th century physicians who sort of bring about the positivist revolution, and start to what's their name? So Tuke, I think, and the Pinel, I think, is the guy, the French guy's name. And basically, the French guys thought of as Pinel and Tuke, and Tuke's an English guy, but they're sort of thought of as the preceding people to the modern psychiatry that developed and psychology movements that developed with William James and whatnot in the 19th century, and then Freud and onward. With the idea that illness was a disease, basically, that could be cured. And that was the big revolution in the 18th century, the shift from, in the beginning of the 18th century, of looking at madness as unreason.
Right.
And then in the end, Pinel and these guys, these positivists, these empiricists come in and they're like, no, yes, it is unreason, but it's unreason that can be cured, and sort of dissected and separated into stuff.
Right.
And so anyway, I'm on a tangent now, but I'm trying to get back to what you were saying, because it is an interesting idea of, how would he look at the modern sort of idea of contamination? And I guess what do you mean, though? I mean, what do you think is the interesting perspective, and what do you think the analogies are?
Well,
maybe that's what you're
specifically
wondering.
With respect to air, because I spent the last half hour trying to find this book, and I can't find it anymore, that I was reading at one point. It was a doctor from the 90s who, or the book came out in the 90s, where he was disputing that viruses are transmitted through the air at all, and that we're completely mistaken to think that we breathe out viruses and somebody else breathes in those viruses and then gets sick.
He probably thinks it's the terrain it develops in just tissue that is bad.
Something I think it has more to do with, we kind of all have viruses in us that can be turned on and off in various situations. Like I don't need to catch HIV. I have all of that within me already, and it could be sort of turned on or off based on certain stimulus or something like that.
That's an interesting idea.
Anyway, I have no idea if it's true or not, but...
I mean, dogmatically, no.
Right. But I don't know. Anyway, when he's talking about air, it's sort of a similar line of thinking, that there's a narrative that there's something in the air that's bad, or the air itself is bad, and there's good air and there's bad air, there's diseased air, and there's sort of virtuous air or something like that. And I could see that line going all the way through to today, because we're talking about a hospital. You know, that's a place where we tend to think there's a lot of disease floating around, and the air is sort of dangerous or high risk or something like that. But you say you go out to the desert, you know, and there's no people around, and you feel like that's, quote, fresh air. Or something like that. So I think that what I'm wondering is, would he think that the entire thing is narrative, including the idea that, you know, if I have the flu, I can give you the flu by just hanging out around you because of the air I'm breathing? Or is that still the same idea of that sort of putrid air that spreads madness, and now we're just saying the flu instead of madness?
Yeah, I don't know, because I think he'd also just say, yeah, it's probably more of also from the medieval,
right?
How the medieval people looked at it too, as maybe more so even. Because like I honestly feel like I see much more of an impression of Foucault's philosophy on today than the more I read him, and the more I'm like, this is basically, I feel like, how we are sort of approaching things in the psychology community.
Sure.
And I shouldn't say we, I'm not part of it. So, but other than I just analyze my mind, man. Man. But I don't know. So, yeah. I don't know. Because I also was beginning to get into what some of his fixes were. But, you know, not because, you know, his big, I think, most of what he has in Madness and Civilization is more of what his qualms are with, you know, the modern psychological community, which is that it's sort of this perverted reason that's held up as supremacy and is, I guess you could say, a narrative, but I don't think he really uses those terms.
Right.
Maybe he does. I don't know. But it seemed like he felt like for his day, and this was actually, I was reading the Stanford philosophy website, which is really good. I don't know. It's very
good. Website. It's a good one.
It is. I don't know who writes, well, they put who writes it, but I haven't like dug in, but I assume they're reputable. But this person was making an interesting point about his writing was in reaction and sort of the big critique of the modern psychology community at his time was that they were basically using their power to classify what had been sort of traditional bourgeois morals, I think is what this person put it as a type of madness to suppress it and, you know, use it for power. And that was his big qualm. And it was, you know, which, you know, which I thought was kind of interesting of what his whole perspective was potentially based off of, especially because at his time, I mean, he was a homosexual, and I mean, he lived during a time when that was literally put in the DSM as a illness or a mental illness. And I mean, in the 50s, there were people that were trying to cure it with all sorts of things that were like, you know, from castration, with hormonally castration, to ablating certain areas of the brain, Yeah. Anyway, I'm on a tangent now, but but it's just interesting. So I don't know. I'm not answering your question. I just had a lot. I had a lot of thoughts about this.
Right. I mean, I'm sympathetic to Foucault's idea generally there. I mean, when you're talking about illness and all that, I've brought up the word disorder. I like that one too. I feel like he tends to use reason and unreason. But all of these ideas imply some kind of archetype of standard or ordered or reasonable or something like that it's being judged against. And then there's a question, like who's deciding that? Maybe it's these bourgeois groups of people who have their idea of what an ordered, healthy life is. Like what is healthy? Who's deciding what's healthy? What is ordered? What's reasonable? What's all of these things?
Well, I think why I petered off, because I went on that tangent just to get to the point that I haven't read. I was starting to read up on some of his solutions. Like, he has definitions of other ways to get knowledge, essentially, like subjective knowledge. There's knowledge and subjectivity. And this is, I think, what he's trying to get at when he talks about how in the Middle Ages,
right?
They looked at madness as like people were basically experiencing some cosmological, force that they just couldn't.
It's just funny,
understand.
Like, oh, don't worry about Frank. He's just communing with the cosmos.
No, exactly. Or he's talking with the gods, exactly. Or he's, they see spirits and stuff.
Right.
I mean, that's just, and so. But I haven't read thoroughly enough on all that to sort of say this is the problem. We're just amateurs walking through the dark here.
It's true. I mean, I feel like the subjective knowledge thing is where I start to jump off the train, because to me it's very unclear what that would even mean, and I bet I have to read more.
Well, this is that's a big rabbit hole, but this is sort of what I keep getting on, and this is what Kant talks about, and this it's the idea of how if you're an empiricist, basically that means sorry, it's late, so everything's shutting down as we talk. My mouth is like starting to rebel.
Oh man, this is gonna have a weird ending to this podcast.
Yeah, I know.
Start philosophically,
philosophically, empiricism seems to be, that all of our knowledge is based off of our observations of our senses. So that's but this is what Hume says, is that's ultimately subjective, and we can't be sure. This is what I think they're trying to say. We can't be sure of what connects the outside world with our representation, and thus there's always this gap between them. I don't know. Anyway, we're getting very metaphysical, right? So, but I think that's what he's getting at when he talks about subjective knowledge is the point.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, that's hard stuff, though, because, you're getting at the fabric of reality, and it's that question that everybody's been trying to answer, though, I think, is that fundamental thing of, like, how do we connect each moment to moment? That's one interesting question. And how do we... and that's ultimately, I think, getting at that cause event, too, of how do you connect our representation of the world with the world itself?
Yeah.
And there's always a leap there. Anyway, cool. I'm just rambling at you now.
It's great. No.
Oh, okay.
It's good. I'm trying to think of kind of broad themes for the Foucault stuff, because it's a little bit hard to parse with specifics. I mean, there's some interesting points, like the sadism thing was kind of funny.
Yeah. Well, I have the big point. I mean, what do you think the fear is? What do you think the great fear is? I think that's the broad point.
I mean, I don't know. I think
it's madness.
Okay, sure.
And I think
like the fear of being mad, right? Because it's the fear of the implications, what that means to be mad, what will happen to you if you're mad, right?
This
is actually this is part of why I connected it to contagion, airborne contagion today, because I remember sort of peak COVID, there was definitely kind of a moralistic thing to it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you got COVID,
Yes.
what did you do? Like, were you being bad?
Yeah.
It was,
yeah.
There
for
was
sure.
a moral sense to the disease itself. Like COVID carried some kind of moral calculation with it because COVID was bad, and so now you've internalized bad into you.
Right.
Naughty. Right.
Yeah. No, you're right. It did. It had this moral element to it.
I don't know. That's what I was thinking when I was reading that passage.
I see. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, but do you agree though that, when I said the great fear is madness, you said the fear of being mad, right?
Right. I think so. So what I was taking was being mad. What will happen to you if you're mad? Because maybe you'll get locked up. Also, what are the social implications of being mad? That means that you have internal in you something impure or evil or unreasonable that goes against sort of the reasonable society.
Yeah. And right. And I mean, this is the thing that I think it was also getting at, because unreason is like associated with death. And I think maybe there was a fear of death in there too. I don't know.
Whoa. Unreason associated with death. That was a crazy association.
But that was what we talked about last week, isn't it? That's what I was trying to say.
Right. I mean, talk about a Judeo-Christian, like embedding of a Judeo-Christian philosophy. Because death is hell.
Is it?
Yeah.
We
to
talked
die
about
is
this.
To go to hell.
Yeah. Right.
Because
I didn't let
Jesus, you live
point.
forever, right?
Yes.
You have eternal life. Otherwise, you have to die.
Do you want to expand on this point, though? Because you had brought this up before, and I don't think I let you.
Well, I think you thought I was
out.
being too picky.
I did, and honestly, I think I was being. I dismissed it as semantic. I remember, and it was I shouldn't have done that because it's interesting. Can you elaborate on the idea about hell as like because I think we're making a point like how everybody was in hell before Jesus, right?
Right. By the way, that's not what I don't think anybody's in hell.
Yeah,
but.
I know. Yeah. So when you said this and thought this up on your own volition.
No. It's more the idea of reason being tied to God because the source of reason and order in the universe is God, right? And the source of chaos and unreason is not God, the devil, Satan, something like that, right?
Yes.
Is hell.
Yeah.
And so associating unreason with death feels to me to be, at its heart, a super Judeo-Christian way of looking at the universe. Reason is good. It's God. God and good are the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I would agree with that. That it is a Judeo-Christian way of looking at it. And it makes sense.
Foucault is the Antichrist.
Well, he certainly does quote Marquis de Sade a lot, and de Sade was definitely an interesting fellow.
Well, I mean, this other problem with Foucault is he also has an awful lot of writings defending what we would call pedophilia. Yeah,
well, I mean, he signed a public thing. Do you know about this, right? He signed with two other Sartre or something. I don't shoot him.
Sartre, yeah.
Was it? Yeah, him and then another French intellectual. They all signed a public thing. Yeah, exactly. No, it's a good point to bring up, though, because I don't know.
We should have just never brought it. I mean, I actually had a conversation online with somebody about this once because I think that Foucault is an important figure and has important things to say. But he was like, but didn't he also defend pedophilia and kind of was a pedophile? And it's like, yeah, probably.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. I didn't realize that when I was going
it's this tricky thing.
I
mean, it's difficult because I think that just somebody can have something valuable to say and be the worst person on the face of the earth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and we talked about this moral relativism. I mean, the '60s isn't that long ago, so it doesn't really apply to this. But it's more of the idea that we would probably discount every writer
Sure.
if we like. I mean, who knows what Newton was doing? And
Right. I mean, I don't even think that
Yeah.
is old. I bet if you start digging into most people's lives, there's some gnarly shit in there that it's good that you don't know about. I'm sure.
I was just listening to a podcast that was talking about like if I should say it was Matt and Shane's secret podcast.
Yeah, I should.
So this was Matt McCuster's idea, or he was quoting somebody, but it was like, you know, if you're not willing to put your own internet history up, then you gotta shut up, or something along the lines, you know.
That's nice. That's pretty good.
Yeah. But I would be like, I don't have a VPN or anything, like,
Right.
you know, yeah.
Nice.
But I say that now, and I'm gonna bite. I'll probably like somebody's gonna play this. Like, all right, dude. It's like, fine, everybody, you guys can see.
You can see.
Yeah. No, I mean, well, so the certainly the redeeming qualities of Foucault's way of thinking, in my opinion,
Yeah.
are the sort of questioning basic assumptions about
Right.
society that because I think that was a very good point that he was making in the psychological community, especially at the time he was living, because they were doing insulin shock therapy, which was just
Right.
crazy. And I mean, this is when MK Ultra was, so they were, you know, like doing basically testing crazy psychological techniques on people without
Right.
their consent to try to learn how to control the mind and wipe memories and stuff like that. And, you know,
Right.
so you do this with insulin shock. You can do this with electroconvulsive therapy. You can do this by playing sounds repetitively and just make people lose their mind, you know. You can give them LSD, crazy doses of LSD. All this is documented as having
Right.
been done. Maybe not all the things I just mentioned, but, you know, certainly some of them. I got to cover my ground here, man. Okay.
At least one of them.
At
Well,
least
maybe
one
not
of
one, but it.
Yeah, maybe
It
not
could
even
be true.
one. I'm just listing off crazy stuff that they did, just
Right.
doctors did at some point, certainly.
Yeah.
And just goes to show that he wasn't wrong in having a lot of, I would say, you could say aggression in some sense when talking about a writing. He's not super aggressive in his writing, but again, you can tell what his opinion is.
Right.
And it's a critical one about the certainly modern psychological establishment. Anyway, I'm
Right.
just rambling at you again, Andrew.
So from your perspective, on a personal level, where do you think that balance lies of where should you be? You know, if you're 100% critical of everything, you tear down all of reality. Maybe that's good, maybe it's not. And if you 100% accept everything, you're basically not really a person. You're not even thinking.
I'm glad you asked that question because I was thinking about that. I think it's Aristotle's old adage of it's just you got to go for the mean, and I think this is why we
The
all
middle way, like
yeah,
Buddha.
yeah, and we all implicitly know this too because we're always talking about the pendulum because we always know everything's sort of supposed to balance itself out to get some kind of average. Obviously, we're going somewhere, but generally, I mean, and this is, I think, where the dialectic comes in, why it's so important, and why if you study history, especially philosophy, you can really see this of like one person puts up a theory and then the next generation counters that theory and then the next generation counters the counter. And
Right.
it's not that perfect, but you know. Yeah. So, so I think it's the middle way. Yeah. What do
Nice.
you think? What do you
What
think?
do I both agree and disagree with that because I think that the middle way is a road to nowhere. Because when the pendulum's in the
We're
middle,
on
it's
the
not moving.
road to nowhere. Sorry.
What?
Talking Heads, right?
Oh man, it's like people who are political centrists and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's in a
Well,
way
where
the most
are we
maddening
going,
of
I
all
guess?
political positions.
Where are we going, I guess?
What?
Where are we going?
I don't know.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is a question though. Like, what do you when you're using language as very active, right? So, I don't know, where are we going? Do we need to be going anywhere?
Well, I don't know. I mean, yeah, I guess that is kind of the more Buddhist philosophy.
Yeah.
That
Thank you.
attempting to go anywhere, you're already suffering.
Yes. Life is suffering. Or
Right.
even Tao. I mean, I think this is what they get at in the Tao, too. A lot of just, yeah, I mean, it's very interesting. And I think why it's ultimately talking about turning off consciousness, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree. And so then it's are we trying to embrace consciousness or not?
Well, we talked, in my opinion, Christians are. They're leaning into it, which is, again, why, going back to this fear of death, thinking of death as the opposite of consciousness, and death associated with the animal, because, again, it's like you sort of die when you go into your animal state because you're not aware
Right.
of your life anymore. And that's what we know as life is, our awareness of it.
Right.
And so, yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
Death is the opposite of consciousness. God is the source of consciousness. God is what gave us consciousness.
Well, and
So
yeah,
death is yet again, it's another thing that moving away from God is death.
Yeah, because yeah, no, I mean, I don't think this is. I think this is a well accepted theory that the Bible can be looked at as sort of a. Well, like religions can be looked at as like a progression of our understanding of consciousness. I feel like this is what Jung was trying to get at, and with
Right.
like, you had a lot of the, I guess if you want to call them ancient religions that were multi-gods.
Uh-huh.
There's a word for it. Polygod.
Polytheistic.
Polytheistic, thank you. That's what it is. And that can be kind of thought of as like the mind, the primitive human mind, if you, whatever, using primitive,
Right.
is a scattered consciousness. It's not really a very singular narrative. It's not it's not a coherent linking those moments that we're talking about. But then as we become more conscious, our religions reflect this, and then they unify into one
Interesting.
God. And then just reading all the stories from the perspective of somebody that's coming to grips with their mind as like, what are you going to think consciousness is when you all of a sudden start to have a narrative in your head and you don't know where this narrative came from? Or there's some kind of cohesion, and to me that's like, oh, there's some God talking to you.
Interesting.
And so that's
Just
why
some
then
stupid God talking.
some God, and then so that's why God is
Right.
So God is consciousness, God is life, and then
Dude, and a
Death
further
is
thought, then
unconsciousness.
that means that Buddhism is like the ultimate satanic religion.
well, no, because
From the Judeo-Christian, because I've heard, like intense Christians say like Hindus and Buddhists and stuff, they're actually just Satan worshipers, and what they mean by it is something silly. But if we're talking about God being the source of consciousness and seeking consciousness as being godly, then attempting to move away from consciousness to I don't even know, to achieve nothingness or something like that is kind of like satanic.
yeah,
It's like
no,
the
I think-
ultimate seeking of death
yeah. No, I mean, I
or
can see
oblivion.
that.
It's the seeking of
Right.
oblivion. It's more than death.
I can see that perspective of how. Yeah, I mean, and you can also look again as if you want to think of clashes of civilization. The most ancient one I don't want to say most ancient, but how do you be politically correct here?
Well, who are you offending, though?
Well, from a European perspective, I feel like the most ancient antagonistic civilization, or antagonistic. I don't know. The most ancient rival were the Eastern rivals. It was you feared the hordes coming over, the plains of Asia, Eurasia, and from the many waves, from all the going back before Genghis Khan and Attila the Hun, right? I mean, there's a lot of examples of this. So to me, it makes sense that you would have this like massive, I guess, a biological mass where you have two sort of centers of the population on either side, and that they would develop religions that are sort of counter to each other.
Right,
and,
of course.
Yeah. And then people would also look at it as a counter, because of the enemy, then they're the devil. They're the
right, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, who am I offending? I don't know. You just got to be careful when you. I don't know. You know me. I'm just.
You just got to be.
I'm not
that's
trying
a good
to
lesson.
be. Yeah, I'm not trying to. Well, because it could. You could look at it from the perspective of like, well, what about the Middle Eastern empires and the African empires and stuff? And it's not to say that those weren't. I mean, that's the thing. That's why it's an imperfect theory. Because I mean, certainly there were fears of invaders from. I mean, at Hannibal. There's an invader from Africa, right?
I mean, we like binaries, though. We like good, evil.
Yeah, it's true.
It can't be like kind of good, kind of evil, kind of good, kind of evil, kind of good, kind of evil.
Right.
That's boring. It's like it's not compelling.
Right.
It does kind of sound like Sam Harris's the moral landscape thing, though.
What?
Oh, did you ever?
No, I know it, but what sounds like that?
The kind of good, kind of evil. Like there's all these peaks and valleys.
Yeah, but I guess I do feel like it just depends on what your axis is.
Right.
In the case of having a Eurocentric axis, it does seem like there's two moral peaks, and it's this east and west way.
Probably. So what does Foucault want? What's his idea? Where's he getting at? What would he like to see, I guess?
I think breakdown of some of the authority that the psychologists have, and a realization that what they say isn't gospel,
right?
And that they shouldn't be given sort of unlimited power to sort of treat people the way that they want.
Right.
To an extent. I mean, this is the question, though. I'm sure he's got enough writing out there. I mean, he was an editor of like a newspaper.
Right.
I'm sure he's got enough out there that his opinions are known. I just don't know him, of just how much, like, I don't know, was he completely like wanted to get rid of all categorizations of quote madness, and maybe return to how we looked at it? I mean, it is a question for you, Mr. Anarchist.
I can't speak for Foucault, but that was kind of what I was getting at when I was asking you about the total deconstruction or complete acceptance. I get the sense from Foucault that he's pretty far on the deconstruction side. I don't know if it's total deconstruction. Like, is his desire to just like fall into a black hole? I don't know. It's hard to imagine that's anybody's desire, but
yeah, in some cases I feel like maybe yes, because it did seem to just not have a very happy upbringing, but I don't know.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because this is a point that I think Nietzsche makes, too. There's like when you're reading a philosopher, you're really just reading them, like who that person was.
Sure.
And so if you have a lot of resentment against a bunch of people, I feel like it comes out. And so, and I don't know if he was suicidal, but I feel like I read it, but I don't know.
I mean, I feel it in his writing, because kind of where I'm going with it is there's a deconstruction in the name of pursuing something. Like, we should stop doing this activity because it's making the world worse, and the world will be a better place if we do this instead.
Yeah.
That's kind of an optimistic argument.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
So like, I think it's interesting that we've read 3 chapters of this now, and there really aren't any direct prescriptions. And obviously he's writing kind of a history, but some people write history with a very judgmental eye, saying like, we did this and now we should be doing this.
It's just because we didn't, I mean, he has prescriptions, and I think he has prescriptions here, and certainly he has them in The Birth of Asylum and in The Conclusion.
Sure.
I mean, he has at least opinions, about...
Like what we should be doing instead.
Well...
See, that's where I'm saying is like to just list a bunch of really bad stuff. Is honestly a really pessimistic and depressing way of doing things.
I agree. He's not very overt in his prescriptions,
right.
But I think he is prescribing when he talks about, in his conclusion, for instance, he sort of brings up the madness that like people like Van Gogh and Nietzsche were able to access and are towed. I'm such a Philistine. I'm sorry. I don't know how to pronounce it. Are towed. And I think there is basically, this is his critique of modern society, because there's also another point, I don't remember exactly where he's talking about how essentially that there's not as many of these types of people today, which I'm drawing this link to say that when he's talking about that, and then he's also he keeps referring to these other people in glowing terms, he's sort of prescribing that, yes, maybe we should lessen some of the way, look at, here's a perspective of how to look at the current psychological establishment as a sort of continuation of this, if you want to say, perversion of reason and this positivism trajectory, and maybe lessen it, and then we can get more people like
he'd like to see a world where there's more
like
Van
Nietzsche.
Goghs.
and Nietzsche and whatnot.
And he's saying, or at least suggesting, that perhaps the reason there aren't so many of those around is because of the psychological establishment.
Yeah, and that they're squandering it by sequestering them away and alienating them in front of with doctors, and we're only communicating them with them in this sterile environment, and we're also suppressing anything that they could communicate, any knowledge that they do have that people thought they used to have.
Right.
We're not getting any of that now.
Yeah.
So I agree, he's not coming out directly and saying, like, this is, here, take this pill. But he's certainly saying it if you read between the lines, I think. And honestly, I bet he is saying it directly, and I just, like, again, this is the thing. He has so much prose in here.
Right.
It's just, like, sometimes we miss it, too.
So if we compare this book, or this writing, to the previous books we've read, I would say all of those have been celebrations of things, including Thaddeus Russell's. His is a celebration of renegadeism and all the crazy spots that it pops up, or a celebration of these great minds that made huge leaps forward in medicine or in chemistry or whatever. And this book feels like basically a long list of like really bad stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so maybe at the end it's like, and maybe if we didn't do so much bad stuff, we'd have some more cool people hanging around. But like,
yeah,
it's really different in tone. It's like it's the exact opposite to me. This book is like, it's oblivion. It's like, oh, this is dark.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think so. I would agree with that. I think, I mean, so to put, again, his life into context, he was wandering around Europe and got kicked out of Sweden, or ostensibly kicked out, I think. They didn't like his work. And
Get out of here.
And he didn't get along with a positivist, empiricist, faculty member. So I agree with you. Ultimately, yeah, it is a dingy. I mean, it's like it's not a. Yeah. But at the same time, though, when you were saying that, I did feel like he talked the most glowingly about sort of the Middle Age / Renaissance.
Sure. I mean, he
era.
definitely had some really colorful flights of fancy, and they were kind of cool.
Yes. Whereas whenever he got to the classical and then into the romantic era, it was talking about chains and like all the that imagery of and just dingy, contaminated cells and whatnot. And,
I mean, it is interesting to flip that narrative on its head, because I feel like in a lot of traditional academia, the Middle Ages is considered sort of like intellectually barren. And then like, oh, we get to the 16 and 1700s, and now people got smart and they figured out how to do important things. Right. I mean, it's sort of fun to flip that on its head.
Yeah. Well, and this is what he does. He likes to do that, right? Right. He flips things on their heads. But I think his big thing, though, is more of not even. I think in some ways it's good that it had a sort of even keel feel to it, whether or not it was a bad feeling, that it was even throughout, because it does also seem like a main method that he developed in his writing, or at least used a lot, was this, what was it called? It's basically it starts with an E, I don't remember. Epistemologic, something like that. Way of looking at history and the development of things, like in this case, madness, from a historical perspective, which seemed obvious to me, but I guess people didn't used to do that. I don't know. But Nietzsche certainly does that. But anyway, I don't know. I'm not coherent anymore.
Well, I think it's interesting because I feel like I sit in this spot with Foucault, where I like what he's doing. I like the flipping things on their head. And in terms of the middle way, I feel like I have no way. I'm very lost in terms of knowing what is and isn't true about anything. It feels like everything is potentially filled with crazy assumptions and strange narratives that we're not even aware of.
But this is why it's fun, because we're gonna at least come up with some kind of philosophy for it. I think so.
But it's interesting because I feel like in what you do, you engage with very high level empirical and positivist types of thinking. And so, like, how does something like Foucault function in your world?
In my world, or the general world?
No, you specifically.
How would he?
No. Like, to you, like, how do you integrate it into the things that you do, if you do?
I don't.
Right.
I would say. Yeah. I mean, I do. No, that's not true. He has gotten me to think about things. I mean, I don't throw away everything. I think, actually, even just listening to the Moral Decay podcast we did, I was even just thinking about how he has sort of even made me feel like then I was sounding a little bit more like I am a very much an empiricist and a positivist,
Right.
but he's making me at least do what I think he's fundamentally wanting people to do is think, yeah, but how sure are you about all this? And
Right.
just, which I think is a healthy thing to do. So in that sense, I integrate it,
Right.
But I would say that's it. How about you?
I mean, I think it's the same. I think that how sure are you about this is the important question. And it's a lot of reading to do to get. You could just say that.
Yeah.
And so it's surprising to me that that's a hard pill for some people to swallow. And maybe it's because of the types of things that he presses on. How sure are you about that? But like something silly, like how sure are you that viruses transmit through the air?
Right.
For me, I'm not sure at all, but that seems to be what all the people who've studied it say. So I have to take their word for it because I've not truly looked into it.
Well, we should do a whole series on statistics and significance. I mean, the history of significance is only like 100 years old. It's like the idea of how you determine if an effect is actually worth considering.
Well, this is what I was thinking when he was talking about, when you were talking about him talking about Van Gogh, and the reason that there aren't more Van Goghs is because of the psychological establishment. How sure is he of that?
Right.
Like, yeah, maybe.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Could be a gazillion things.
Yeah. Yeah. Where is there? I'm trying to think if there was any other stuff that I wanted to bring up. Any other points you were thinking of making?
I mean, the sadism thing was interesting, and that was another one that I was curious how he would read that transitioning into today, and would he still see sort of doctors and psychologists as being sort of rooted in sadism?
Oh, see, I didn't even think about that. Did you feel like that's what he was saying?
Well, because he says, sadism appears at the very moment that unreason, confined for over a century and reduced to silence, reappears. No longer an image of the world, no longer as a figura, but as a language and a desire. So it's a little bit unclear to me where he's saying the source of sadism is. Is it in the...
What page
the Mad
is this?
People?
We finally have the same, I think, edition.
It's 209. It's whatever, paragraph 209 or point 209.
It's always good radio. Yeah. Yeah. Sadism is not a name finally given to a practice as old as Eros. It is a massive cultural fact which appeared precisely at the end of the 18th century.
I mean, that's a crazy statement right there. Sadism appeared at the end of the 18th century.
Right. And which constitutes one of the greatest conversions of Western imagination. Unreason transformed into delirium of the heart, madness of the desire, the insane dialogue of love and death, and the limitless presumption of appetite. Sadism, I mean, I could keep going. Sadism appears at the very moment that unreason, confined for over a century and reduced to silence, reappears no longer as an image of the world, no longer as a figura, but as language and desire. So, yeah, I mean, I think it gets at first the idea that it is characterized and categorized as a psychological sort of pathology because psychology is becoming a thing. So, and maybe that's where he's getting at with the language idea, is where you've given a name to this, this phenotype. And I think it's tying it with unreason, because I think this general theory that he's making, his general critique about psychology, is that it basically used maybe a sphere of unreason that is unknown and will always be unknown.
Sure.
And they've slowly sort of expanded the definition until it encompasses people that they can then control and stuff. I don't know. I'm going off on it. I don't know if that made any sense, but I don't know. Does that answer your confusion about sadism, though? It seems like you think sadism existed then because it was being categorized. That's what I think at that time.
Sure.
As a pathology of the mind.
Right. Yeah, could be.
Okay.
I don't know.
I feel like I never fully answer your questions very well, so I apologize. I don't even know if they require an answer.
I don't think that they're necessarily that they're often. I don't have answers for them either. That's why I'm asking.
Yeah. I like this though. I'm glad you suggested it. It was good. I didn't really know what to expect. Yeah. So, but yeah, I think marked. Oh yeah, I thought it was interesting. They kept talking about all the debaucherous things that happened there too. I mean, and that's it's just the debaucherous things that happen in the asylums.
I mean, don't they talk about that now too? Like, mental institutions have a lot of both sex and sexual abuse / sexual assault.
Yeah, because it's like, I think I don't know what the numbers are. I would imagine historically, yeah.
Right.
Like,
I mean, I don't know any data on it at all. It's just it's a story that I've heard.
Yeah. I think the definition, the thing that made me think it was madness, fear, is on 212. The fear of madness is much freer with regard to this heritage. And while the return of unreason has the aspect of a massive repetition. Oh, and this is where I think, again, it's, talking about reason, talking about going back to the moment. It's this, which we've all came from. So that's where I think the repetition sort of idea comes from. I don't know. I got to look at this Spurzheim guy. He had some really interesting thoughts about madness more frequent in England than anywhere else. I thought this was interesting. The English malaise was like apparently a type of melancholy.
Yeah.
Because people in England and also were known to like commit suicide more and stuff. And this is just a thing known back in the day, which I thought was just a really interesting idea. Because again, I have this idea that it's a disease of consciousness, right? You become so, and it's like, you become so wrapped up in your anxiety over death that ultimately, and the meaningless of it all, it's almost like the ultimate control that the consciousness has over itself. Not saying you should do that.
So the closer you get to God, the closer you are to madness. Your brain explodes.
Yeah, because it's ultimately a paradox, I think, consciousness. It's just you're reflecting on yourself. So it's, I think that's why it's always this weird loop thing. Sorry. Like I said, I had a lot, because we're wrapping up Foucault, so I just wanted to get all these thoughts out. Do you have any, so I don't want to.
What? No, I had one more thought when you were talking about.
Yes, please.
Madness existing in this domain in sort of a bubble, and sort of the people of reason trying to narrow the field of reason. And I can imagine somebody sort of in the spirit of reason categorizing more and more and more things as mad, ultimately coming back to the only source of reason is just themselves, sort of coming full circle to the truth. They are also then embracing the postmodern idea that the source
Right.
of truth is from within. Truth
Right.
is subjective.
Right.
In the name of objectively categorizing out madness and reason.
Yeah. No, I free your mind and your ass will follow. The kingdom of heaven is within. Which is, of course, funkadelic. But there's a lot of truth in that, and I think it's getting at what you're saying too. Is there is that also. Yeah, they ultimately come around to maybe the same way of thinking, the positivist. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, because the source of truth ultimately does end up being subjective for them as well.
Well, no, though, because this is what Kant. I mean, this is where Kant gets a little bit wiggly about bringing in like transcendental stuff, and I'm not even going to pretend that I understand this, but I think Kant is, heralded because he sort of comes up with a way around this subjective idea of everything. Mm-hmm. But I agree, if you're being honest, I think we don't have a good answer to that.
Right.
Yeah.
What did I learn in freshman cultural anthropology at MATC? There's 3 basic epistemology types. There's traditional, there's modern, and there's postmodern. Traditional is truth comes from God. Modern is truth comes from that which is observable or provable. And postmodern is truth comes from within you.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, that's not a bad.
I mean,
way
it's
of
like
thinking about
freshman
it.
distillation.
Yeah, but that's like that's a pretty good distillation.
Yeah.
Because then if you say God is within us, then, of course, the postmodern and the traditional become the same, man.
Which is funny to call postmodern traditional. That's wild.
Yeah. Well, and I guess it ultimately just goes back into itself, man. And the dang old thing, what's that end of Big Lebowski? Anyway. And the earth just keeps on turning. You know what they say.
Yeah.
I thought so. I was reading on and read some of the Birth of Asylum, skimmed through it at least, and because this is where he's talking about basically the transition from the classical idea of looking at madness as unreason to now looking and incurable to now Pinnell and Tuke sort of are like, no, it's actually a bunch of different things we can categorize and we can actually cure them too. And it's interesting because, I mean, Pinnell, when you go to just his Wikipedia, it talks in very glowing terms about him of just trying to be a reformer of a lot of the, you could say, medieval ways, although Foucault wouldn't say medieval ways that they were held in the 18th century. But he does describe, just people being packed into places and fecal excrement all over and not, having any just basic sanitation.
Yeah.
Pinnell tried to reform in that sense. And so this is also where you have to ask, I think people have to ask themselves of, we gave up a lot when we industrialized, but, there are a lot of great things about modernity. There's a lot of crazy bad things, but it was solving some problems. And even Pinnell, even though Foucault talks very, I would say, negative light about him in this, it was just interesting that, even Pinnell was probably in his head doing good.
Right.
But I guess, I don't know what that's worth. But I just thought that was kind of interesting reading about it. But so in it, though, I was going to talk about a specific part. And I'm sorry, I'll stop rambling, too. I don't know if this is interesting. Is any of this interesting? I don't know.
Call in, text in if it's interesting.
No, I guess I'm asking you.
Oh, yeah, I'm enjoying it.
Oh, you are? Okay. Well, that's all. That's all I care about, Antushka.
Yeah, right.
I had an annotated page. Here it is. Okay. So, and here again is where I think he sort of tells us that he has an opinion. So he says, it is thought that Tuke and Pinnell opened the asylum to medical knowledge. They did not introduce science, but a personality, whose powers borrowed from science only their disguise, or at most their justification. These powers, by their nature, were of a moral and social order. They took root in the madman's minority status, in the insanity of his person, not of his mind. So that's telling us his opinion, I would say, in more ways than one. And in that, telling us some of the bad things about it. Like, this is where he's making this point of, that I think is always made now about, how, I guess, these structures are a way to just imbue power, exert power onto people. So anyway,
I think so. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah.
I mean, also the status as a minority, that it's an interesting point. I remember I made that a long time ago, not quoting Foucault, but essentially that something wouldn't really be considered a mental disorder if 75% of the population had it, because that would just be the way people are.
Right. Yeah.
And
yeah.
Except now, I feel like the thing is, with our sort of objective forms of classification, we can have situations like that happen. Like 80% of the population could have a mental disorder, which is a funny thing.
Yeah, no, it's
because then, like, the source of order is actually, it becomes like the DSM rather than like an archetypal human even.
What do you mean by that, actually, the DSM part?
It doesn't have to be the DSM. I'm just using that as an example. I mean that if we define a mental disorder as somebody who ticks these boxes, and then we find that 100% of humans have that disorder, then it turns out that 100% of humans are disordered, rather than maybe you need to redefine your terms.
Right.
Because the source of order is actually the definition itself, rather than the observable reality.
Right. I see what you're saying. Yes. And then this is how sort of authorities calcify, I guess. Yeah, because they don't change enough. Because basically what you're also talking about is that it would change.
Right.
With time, right?
Which is essentially what he's writing about, like the changing relationship to madness.
Mm-hmm. Well, and yes. Yeah. Yeah, no, I think I see what you're saying. Yeah. Well, and so I also just felt like I really liked this breakdown from Stanford.
Oh, yeah.
On Foucault. I just thought it would be maybe a nice way to just summarize what somebody else thinks about what this was. So, standard history saw the 19th century medical treatment. So this is from the Stanford Philosophy website. Stanford history on Foucault. Standard history saw the 19th century medical treatment of madness developed from the reforms of Pinnell in France and Tuke brothers in England as an enlightened liberation of the mad from the ignorance and brutality of preceding ages. But according to Foucault, the new idea that the mad were merely sick, quote, mentally ill, and in need of medical treatment was not at all a clear improvement on earlier conceptions, e.g. the Renaissance idea that the mad were in contact with the mysterious forces of cosmic tragedy, or the 17th, 18th century view of madness as a renouncing of reason. So I just thought that was a nice summary, honestly, of what we've been saying and what Foucault's been saying. So thank you for letting me read that.
You're so welcome. Okay, so on to Nietzsche next, right?
Yes, we'll close the book for now.
Yeah. Get out of here, Michel.
Michel, ma belle. Très bien ensemble.
Right. That's right. It is a very très bien ensemble. It's a very très.
Yeah, so I had some thoughts on this.
So this is the basic writings, that one?
Yeah, did you find a thing?
Yes.
Cool, okay. Because I was going to say, if not, we could...
What edition?
What edition?
Or year?
I don't know.
All right.
It's a good question. It's the Modern Library edition.
Oh, yeah.
2000 copyright.
That's my favorite edition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing it quickly. But
That's fine. It's fine.
2000 is the year, so.
All right. 2000 Modern Library. I think that's fine.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So I was thinking we could do, but it is maybe one of his more spicy ones, but
Ooh.
it would work well with our 3 format.
Okay.
Would be the genealogy of morals.
Ooh, I like that.
Have you heard of that?
No.
Okay. This is, I feel like where most of what people get wrong about Nietzsche is from misreading this.
Ooh, okay. And I think I know what you're talking about. Most of what people get wrong. Which people are you talking about?
I'm going to have a lot of editing on my hands, let's just say.
You're making homework for yourself?
I think so. But it would be, I think we could do it justice.
Sure.
Although, I mean, I think he talks in like the introduction of it how you should really read his Beyond Good and Evil before. So if you want to read that before, feel free. But
me,
no pressure. Yeah,
sure.
I have read some of it.
Nice.
No, I have read all of it, but it's been a second, and I did it on my own, so I don't know how thoroughly I grasp the concepts.
Okay.
But does that sound okay to you?
Yeah,
Wanna try
that's great.
The other idea I had was we could do Twilight of the Idols. That's just a fun read,
Okay.
But okay, sounds like you're down.
My copy is kind of weird. It doesn't have attempt at self-criticism. Oh, the table of contents doesn't say where things are in the book. The Birth of Tragedy.
Oh, Birth of Tragedy is the first one in the collection. Okay. Well, I can tell you what page it starts on.
Okay, well, let me just write it down and I'll find it. So can you say the name again? What we're doing?
The name of Genealogy of Morals.
Genealogy.
Oh, so the actual thing is on the Genealogy of Morals.
Okay, cool.
In mine, it officially begins on 460, page 460.
Okay, cool. Sounds good.
Sounds good, man.
All right. We did it. We
Cool.
worked hard to get this one out.
No, it's true. It was good though. I mean, I honestly, I feel like jumped a philosophical plateau with this. To be honest, in my own sort of thinking, it helped a lot. So I thank you, Antushka. I thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Wow.
Yeah, I
Pretty
know.
heavy.
I'm sorry, it's late.
Yeah. Well, I've never read Nietzsche, so I'm excited to get into this.
Yeah. Gird your loins.
Okay, I will. I'll gird them.
Okay, good.
All right.
Cool. Yeah. Okay. How's everything's good though? Okay. Cool.
Yeah. Everything's good. I trust everything's good.
Let's get the niceties out of the way at the end.
At the end. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. All right. Good
All right.
talking.
Goodbye.
See ya.